What is up? Welcome to another edition of the Fantasy Life Podcast. I am Marcus Grant, joined by Dwayne McFarland, and we have made it through the entirety of the NFL regular season, but we're not done. Of course, there's still playoffs. There's still folks playing DFS, maybe playing playoff challenge type situations there. So, Dwayne, we're still at it, right? We're still in the lab. We're still hanging out in the bunker. I know there are fewer teams now to analyze, which is probably nice, but our work's not quite done yet, is it?
Oh no. And like this is the fun part for us because like I don't know about for you, Marcus, but like I love this time because we've been doing what we've been doing and we love what we do, but you've been doing it for 18 weeks. And so when you get a change like this, even though you're covering some of the same concepts, right, in your content, just to be thinking about it in a fresh new way, right? So if you're thinking about, best ball tournaments and things like that now, like you have the whole added layer of, well, I need my team, whatever teams you're betting on, basically, you need them to advance. It's not just as easy as, I'm going to pick the best players. It's like, oh, well, actually, the best player could be, the best receiver might be Tyreek Hill, but I would rather pick, this third wide receiver from the Chiefs, who I think are going to the Super Bowl. So it just really adds a layer to everything we're doing. And like, I just love football. So when we get the best teams starting to condense down to be on the field against one another every single week, like before I liked fantasy football, I just loved real football. And so like it kind of takes you back to the roots as well. Like you kind of have this, I don't know, this is the purest part of the season for me where I do become, even though I'm still playing all these other games because I'm a degenerate and I love them, I also just have more just general rooting interest. I just love watching the game.
Yeah, I think that's the part, right? I think anybody who's been a football fan for any amount of time, they have some sort of playoff story or something about the postseason. And you're right. This is when everything turns up a notch, right? Because we are in the tournament now where you've got, in theory, the 14 best teams still left and all playing for the Lombardi Trophy. So that in and of itself is just enough drama. But just in case you need a little bit of extra spice for it, maybe your team didn't make the tournament, and you have some reason to stay interested, we got plenty of information to kind of help you do that over the coming weeks or so. But we will get into some utilization stuff. You can, of course, check out the utilization report at fantasylife.com. We'll also talk about the coaching carousel because that has begun to spin. We've already seen some coaches dismissed, and we'll see whatever happens. Maybe we'll talk about Sean McVay, who's sort of in limbo, it appears, right now. So there may be an opening in Los Angeles. There may not be. We'll kind of figure that out as we go along. But want to start with just a great piece of news. We mentioned Damar Hamlin. Of course, he has been one of the main stories in the NFL for the last week plus. And he was released from the hospital in Cincinnati, which is absolutely amazing news. He sent out a tweet, says, "Not home quite just yet. Still doing and passing a bunch of tests. Special thank you to Buffalo General. It's been nothing but love since arrival. Keep me in y'all prayers. Please, #3strong." So, Dwayne, I know we were all sending out our thoughts and prayers, and really more than anything, it's just amazing. It's just a wonderful thing to see. I know he's, as he says, he still has work to do, but from where we were, a week ago, Dwayne, this is just absolutely incredible and very, very encouraging.
Yeah, absolutely. It just brought a big smile to my face when I found out that he was out of Cincinnati, getting to go back to Buffalo, or was back in Buffalo. Obviously, you have to make a lot of progress to get to that point. So, yeah, just continuing to send love, prayers to the Hamlin family, like I know everyone else is. But just great news. And honestly, it makes watching the game, like it just makes it sweeter again, like because it was just hanging over, right, for good reason, right? That cloud was kind of hanging over, and still a great reminder, that life, we should never take it for granted. Hug those around you, tell them you love them. Weird things happen. Just thankful that he's good.
Absolutely. Let's get to what happened, though, in Week 18 on the field, because there was some weirdness in a lot of ways. Maybe the weirdest thing, and certainly the thing that had my Twitter timeline spinning quite a bit, was the Chargers. They went into Sunday with nothing to play for. They couldn't improve their seed. They were pretty much locked into where they were going to be. And they played all their starters. And not only did they play their starters, they played them for a long time. And Mike Williams gets hurt, Joey Bosa gets hurt, and on top of it, Dwayne, they lose the game. I don't know. I mean, I'm sure we could debate this for the next hour or so, and we may not come up with a good answer for what Brandon Staley was doing. I mean, they're in the playoffs, but it seems like they have put themselves into a bad situation that they didn't have to. I just don't understand what was going on there.
Yeah, everything that could possibly go wrong or bad, like as far as the outcomes you were hoping for from this game, they all happened. You were risking your starters to do what? To keep momentum heading into the playoffs? Well, you hurt your starters and you lost your momentum. So it's like if you really believe in that sort of thing, like I don't look, every coach is different. They will tell you every team is different. I kind of like just being black and white on this thing, for when it comes down to a team like the Chargers, where they knew they couldn't improve their seating, right? You had already seen the Ravens lose earlier in the day. You knew where you stood. I could get it. Like if you were potentially going to have to be the 6th seed, and that makes the matchup right in the following week, tougher. That could change things, but that isn't what happened. And so I don't understand. Like I feel like these guys need like a simple risk reward flow chart, right? What is the reward really for winning the game? I don't know that it's tangible to us. Do we really have something that says, well, if you win the week before you go into the playoffs, or if you keep a certain streak going, you're this much more likely to win the next game? I don't really think there's anything like that out there, right? What I will tell you is if you don't have Joey Bosa or you don't have Mike Williams next week, that definitely impacts your chances of winning next week.
Yeah, and that's going to be the interesting part to kind of keep an eye on. Last I saw, Mike Williams was listed as day-to-day, so this is going to be important for the Chargers. And if they don't have those guys going into this week, which look, the Jaguars are certainly not going to be a pushover. You have to go to Jacksonville to play that game. I'm sure there will be a lot of discussion in and around Los Angeles and just in the NFL generally about what Brandon Staley did. The Cowboys, they also played their starters late into a game, despite the Eagles pretty much having locked things up, although they did have to sweat it out a little bit at the end. 49ers were running through the Cardinals, and that wasn't really a surprise. I guess because it was similar situation, and you are the resident Cowboys fan on this show. I mean, any idea as to exactly what Mike McCarthy was thinking there?
No. And like my dad had no clue either. My phone was blowing up. My brother, my dad, my family members I'm getting a lot of WTFs. It was one thing like when they played the starters, and the problem was when things didn't go well. Like I think like what we were talking about with the Chargers, McCarthy's got something in his mind that, well, I got to have a good drive. I've got to have a good drive. And the good drive never came. And so they just kept pushing it and pushing it and pushing it. And to your point, once we got into the third quarter, fourth quarter, it was pretty evident that those other games were over, right? And the Cowboys knew the Giants were resting their starters. There wasn't a good chance for the Eagles to win, even though the Giants made that game tighter than what the Eagles probably would have hoped for. But yeah, I just didn't get it. They were fortunate that they didn't suffer the same consequences, right, that Staley did. And we didn't even mention for the Chargers, they got to turn around and play on Saturday after all that. Yeah. But for the Cowboys, they were fortunate that they did not come away with any of the injuries. Now, there was a moment where we saw Micah Parsons leave the field. We know Pollard's been battling a quad injury that's kind of held him down. He missed week 17 with that injury, or it might have been week 16, but Pollard's definitely been battling through some things. So they got lucky that it didn't turn out bad for them in that way. But to your point, they still, if they believed mojo was a thing heading into the playoffs, you just gave it away against the Commanders. I personally don't think it's a huge deal. If we look at the models, like even if you look over on Fantasy Life, we'll talk about the power ranks in a minute. Like the Cowboys are still in good standing. You go over to 538, you look at their odds. They're one of the better teams. Like if you're thinking best ball and you want one of the teams that play in the first week that still have a chance to get to the Super Bowl, it's like the Bills, the 49ers, and the Cowboys are the three teams that you're betting on. Now, those other two are clearly ahead. So I don't think this hurts the Cowboys that much. I just think it's funny because, the thing you were trying to achieve, it ended up blowing up in your face and you took this risk really for no reason.
Well, it's a good thing that, the Cowboys have a very steady, calm, not at all overreacting fan base to these sorts of things too. So
yeah, very calm.
I'm sure there was no panic, no hand wringing at all amongst the Cowboys fans during this whole weekend at all. At least they do have the extra day. They play on Monday night against the Buccaneers, so it does give them an extra day to sort of heal up and kind of game plan for Tampa Bay. Maybe the funniest thing, at least for me, as a dispassionate observer, the Texans beat the Colts, and nothing sums up, the Texans maybe better than this week. Even when they win, they lose. They go and they beat the Colts, and in the process, lose the number 1 overall pick to the Chicago Bears. They go out and they fire Lovie Smith. Now, they didn't announce until after the game, but I'm sure plenty of people knew before the game. Lovie himself may have known before the game, and you saw a lot of comments about, Lovie setting fire to the thing on the way out. It did sort of feel like the end of Office Space, where Milton finds the check for all the money and then sets the place on fire. And the next thing you see him hanging out on a beach. That's kind of what it feels like. Lovey sort of torching the Texans on the way out, throwing up the deuces and leaving them with the number 2 pick instead of the number 1 overall pick. So I'm sure he will be welcomed back in Chicago. I mean, Dwayne, I'm guessing Lovie Smith doesn't have to buy a meal in Chicago for the very near future, right? Because he did the Bears another solid. I just laughed. I mean, look, being at number 2 is not a bad spot at all. But if you're the Texans, sort of feels like a missed opportunity to me. Maybe I'm wrong.
Yeah, I totally agree. Like, look, I get it. Coaches coach to win games. Players play to win games. I think it's tough to draw that line of we're just going to tank. The best way to tank, right, is put in, all your backups. Like that's the best chance you're going to have to lose. So I think you can question, if you're the GM, like, can you step in and really demand something like that? Then there's potential ramifications that spill over to the next year, right? Team morale, things like that. Now, I will say with the Texans, like they need a rewash pretty much of the whole roster. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, I don't know how worried you are about that, but it's just an interesting, dynamic, right? The way those things all play out. And to give Lovey credit, this is a team, and you had mentioned it, I believe, last week on the pod or the week before, but like they've been pretty scrappy down the stretch. Mm-hmm. They took the Cowboys to the wire. They took the Chiefs to the wire. They had a couple other similar games before that. It ended weird. Jacksonville blew them out, right, in week 17, and then they turn around and come back and beat the Colts in week 18. So I think the team was playing for Lovey. So I think you do have to give him credit for that, but it's not good for the Texans overall because what do they need? What do you have to be a winning team in this league? You have to have a quarterback. And many believe that, Bryce Young from Alabama is the golden ticket. Like if you're eating all the Willy Wonka chocolate bars and you're getting fat, all this time, like this is the golden ticket. This is what you've been waiting on. And you just you missed it like by one candy bar, half a candy bar. I don't know what you want to say, but that makes it a challenge because the funny part, Marcus, is that the Colts winning the Colts losing moves them to the 4 seed, which now puts them in striking distance to trade up with Chicago if they decide that Fields is their QB of the future. And they're, rumors have them looking at, 2 of the defensive linemen. And so they could trade down to 4. They're probably still going to get one of the linemen. They can pick up additional picks. The Colts then leapfrog the Texans to get Bryce Young. Now, there are good consolation picks at quarterback. Like some people would argue CJ Stroud. I'm not way deep in draft season. I'm just really on the surface like, hey, I've watched these guys some this season, right? I haven't dug into all of them and all their data, but a lot of people love CJ Stroud too. So it's not like you're completely left hanging if you're the Texans, but you would like it to be your option, that you get to pick any quarterback that you want in the class to kind of start, hopefully, right? The watch on the next 15 years, which is maybe a turnaround, for the Texans. So yeah, it's tough going from 1 to 2, and it's great for the Bears because if they really don't want to pick a quarterback because they have Fields, like they, now they've come out and said they're not drafting a quarterback. I saw some people be like, oh man, they lost all their ammunition. Not really. As long as other people fear someone else coming up to number 1 to pick a quarterback, right, then they still have leverage. So they're going to probably be fine because you know how this goes, Marcus. As teams get closer and closer to the draft, like quarterback is the position that climbs the most. Mm-hmm. I mean, the froth, like the market usually gets frothy, the closer we get and the trade talks pick up, the rumors pick up. So I think the Bears will still have plenty of leverage despite what they shared with the media today. And like they could really potentially, like they need multiple picks because they traded away an early second, what turns out to be an early second for Chase Claypool, and they need as many picks as possible. So I think this is really good for them.
Well, I also think what's important to keep in mind is even if they come out and say we're not looking at drafting a quarterback, and look, I like Justin Fields. I'd like to see them sort of build around him. The start of draft season is also the start of smokescreen season. So let's keep in mind that what we hear, what is said. Teams tend to fudge it a little bit too. So who knows? But the Bears very much in the catbird seat. I expect a lot of offers to come their way, and who knows what they do with that number 1 pick. If they keep it, if they trade it, we'll see. That's what's going to be interesting to talk about over the next 3+ months or so. By the way, If you need help getting ready for your playoff contest, please do not worry. We have you covered over at AMP. Fantasy Life is doing 4 live radio shows a week on AMP, and you can catch Dwayne on Sunday mornings before kickoff, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Myself and Jordan Fiegelman, we hop on every Sunday morning at 11 a.m. doing live radio. And, the cool thing is, like, we even got to change it up last week, because we've really been doing starting lineups. We've been doing start sit questions and taking really any kind of questions that people want to ask. But last week was interesting because we built a DFS lineup on the air. Jordan and I, we were feeling pretty good about it. And everybody got to hear what that lineup was. It didn't come through in the end, but it was fun. And we, obviously we're breaking down all the latest news from the morning, players that are out, players that are in, matchups, all those sort of things. And people can call in, they can hop in the chat. We take all the calls. Jordan won't let me leave without taking all the calls. He also won't let me leave the show without answering everything in chat. So whatever your question may be, whether it's DFS, playoff, best ball, it doesn't matter. Anything, you can come jump in and just hang out with us for an hour. So it's fun.
I was going to ask if he makes you stick around and answer all the questions, and you pretty much lock that down right there.
Every single one, every single question.
Yes.
We won't leave. I force the issue. It's our gimmick.
This is such a big deal that Jordan actually jumped in to answer the question for us. So there it is. So come hang out with Jordan and Dwayne on Sunday morning. Go to the App Store, download the AMP app. Once you're there, follow at MB Fantasy Life. Hang out in the chat, get your questions answered. And if nothing else, just hang out and have a good time and kind of get yourself ready for the weekend that is to come. All right. We got plenty, of course, over at Fantasy Life, the website itself, including some power rankings and for the 14 teams that are still left playing football. And I went and took a look at it this morning. I want to kind of get into this a little bit. But first, can you run us quickly, Dwayne, through how exactly this thing works?
Yeah, for sure. So, some people will hear the beginning of this and they're like, "It's based on a what? A ELO model? Like, what is that?" Setting all the technical stuff aside, that's basically a system that was set up to really handle strength of schedule. Whether you're talking about chess, right? It's looking at your relative opponent. Whether it's talking about video games, they use this sort of model really all over the place. You've seen it more and more in the NFL over the last 10 years. But in a nutshell, this is what it does. If you beat the teams you're supposed to, let's say you pick up 5 points, right, for a win. If you beat teams that you shouldn't beat, though, that you're ranked below, then you pick up additional points. You also pick up additional points for winning by larger margins. So essentially, the lowest a win can count for in the model is 5 points. The best it can count for is 10 points. So if you're a team that's ranked 25th based on average points scored, point differential, and team wins, those are the 3 factors we use. So say you are, let's go with the Cardinals, and you're playing the Bills. And you beat the Bills. That's worth more than the Bills beating the Cardinals. So good teams, they just need to win more games, right? If you're ranked highly, you should be winning. What you don't want to do is play below your level of competition. And that's essentially what the data shows us, right? It helps us understand, takes all of strength of schedule, puts it all into one nice little number. It's not perfect, but it gives us a really good feel for, how these teams should be ranked, taking all those factors together, if that makes sense, Marcus.
No, it does. My first thought is it sounded sort of like the BCS, but less controversial.
Well,
maybe
BCS used to use ELO before they went to the committee. So yes, you've heard of the way the BCS did that. You've nailed it. Yes, they did. They used a similar system to help them, narrow down.
There it is. So the BCS was not all bad. There you go. I'm sorry. I'm still salty just because one year SC got screwed out of the BCS championship because it's like they beat Hawaii at the beginning of the year, but then Hawaii lost to Syracuse, and then that wrecked Hawaii's streak. It was a whole thing, and I just remember feeling screwed because he didn't get in because of a game that had nothing to do with them.
I live in Fort Worth, and so I'm here with TCU. So I raised my kids taking them to TCU games. They, my oldest son, he goes to Texas Tech, not TCU. I'm actually thankful, son, thank you if you're listening, because it costs a lot less to go to Texas Tech than TCU. But we're fans because it's close. It's 15 minutes from my house, the stadium. So we haven't gone as much lately, but I think a lot of TCU fans would have rather been back in the BCS where maybe they don't make it into the Final Four. You just win a nice bowl game, but you don't go out and have what happened, on Monday night. It was tough. I felt bad. For the kids at that point. You just don't want to see anybody get beat by that much. But hey, they made it there. That was, that in itself obviously was kind of a Cinderella story. It just wasn't enough to deal with Georgia.
Yeah, I mean, it was an amazing season for TCU. It was an unfortunate end to them, but as a friend said to me a few weeks ago, he's like, I feel like the only team that can beat Georgia right now is the Chiefs. don't feel too bad.
That's great.
Don't feel too bad about that. I know it's gonna be a tough off season, but they have a lot to be proud of there over at TCU. Let's take a quick look though at some of these teams here. The Bills, number one, not really a major surprise there. Niners at 2, Eagles at 3, Chiefs at 4. Where I think it gets kind of interesting. The Vikings at 6, and maybe it's because I know they were great in one-score games all year long, Dwayne, but this also felt like a team that they did a lot to keep both teams in the game. Either they would be behind and come back and win. They would have a lead. They'd let the other team back in. So maybe it's because of how they won those games that 6 feels a little bit weird. But I guess in the end, the record kind of speaks for itself.
Yeah, and so they didn't pick up a ton of the blowout wins that we talked about, but ultimately they were winning the games in the end that they should, and then they had a couple of games that the model thought they shouldn't have won, right? That they did win. So they end up scoring really well. The other thing that I would say, is this still lines up pretty much like if you go over to 538, right, and look at their models. If you look at the Vikings, they've got a 9% chance of making the Super Bowl. I want to say that is like the 6th or 7th best odds. So it's pretty close with what we have here. But I agree with you. Like if you start nitpicking the top 6, I think the team that most people's eyes gravitate to, I think you've nailed it. I think it's going to be the Vikings because of what you mentioned. And if you start to look at some other data points, like, for example, expected points added and things like that, you start to see really which teams are more complete, which teams really maybe are one-sided. They win everything with offense, or maybe their offense hasn't been as good, but the defense carries them. And if you look at if you look at the Vikings, they're just kind of meh. They're like, compared to the league average, which would be a 0 in expected points average added, like they just hover along, whether it's offense, defense, just kind of like what we would expect their record to be. It's almost like you feel like they should be this 500 team and they're not. And that's really what multiple other data points tell us. And so I agree with you. I like the Vikings did immediately stick out to me as the one that I'm like, I get the math and it probably works, but I just will not be surprised if they exit after the first week.
It's just one of those things of like looking at the math versus sort of watching them and like,
yeah,
all right, let's figure that one out. The other ones that jumped out at me, and you and I kind of talked about this before the show a little bit, the Ravens at 9, the Dolphins at 10. And I feel like so much of what happens with those teams is dependent on whether or not they have their starting quarterbacks. We don't know what the status of Lamar Jackson is going to be. We don't know what the status of Tua Tagovailoa is going to be. And I think those guys being there or not being there makes a world of difference in those two teams' outlooks.
Yeah, I totally agree. And this is something where we didn't this year adjust the model based on the starting quarterback. Like if you go over to places like 538 and some of these, and look, they spend a ton of time on these things and they're really great, resources. We're getting into this, right? And we want to get better at these sorts of things as well. But that's one thing that we immediately looked at. We're like, like if we could account for one other thing, it would probably be the starting quarterbacks going forward. And because I agree with you, I would honestly rank the Ravens, if we know Lamar is out. If Lamar's in, I really don't have a problem where they sit here, right? Because I think he gives them a chance. I would feel better about them than the Giants. I would feel better than them, probably than the Seahawks. Jaguars, I don't know. I might still feel better about the Jaguars, but Lamar, gives you a chance, so you can feel better about where they're at. But if this has to be Tyler Huntley, right? It's not gonna be the same. So I would definitely push them lower. And then to your point, same thing for the Dolphins. Tua, he's got to think big picture here. I know we heard yesterday in the news they don't know for sure. They're waiting on more tests. Like part of me is just like, man, dude, just take care of your health. Just don't play again this year. Let's not. I mean, it would be his. What would it be? His 4th concussion if he has another one? Yeah, because he's had 3. So I would rather Tua sit. I hate it for the Dolphins fans, and that really hurts them. If you're going to have to start a 3rd-string quarterback and Skylar Thompson, or you're going to end up going with Teddy Bridgewater, who's got a banged-up finger. Obviously, you've got Tyreek Hill, you've got Jalen Waddle. They can get you into any kind of game, but you got to go play the Bills.
Yeah.
So now this isn't accounting for who you got to play this week, right? If you guys want to see those sort of things again, like 538's got some cool stuff up there, but like 538 gives them an 11% chance of making it to the divisional round, 89% chance of the Bills making it another round. So, and I think we would probably agree with that.
Yeah, I think that's probably about right. Yeah, obviously having Tua gives them a better chance, but having to go to Buffalo and play the Bills, always going to make them sort of an underdog in that situation. But you want to go check out all of the rankings for the 14 playoff teams? You can go do that at fantasylife.com. Dive into it, and then you can let us know whether it's on the internet or wherever.
One last quick note on it, like just as because people go check it out. One thing I found really interesting is a lot of the teams that do rank at the bottom had some similar things, like as far as the utilization kind of stuff that I look at. For example, like if you look at the Chargers, you look at the Dolphins, and your favorite, if you look at the Vikings, and if you look at Seattle, all of them put themselves in third and fourth down and 7+ yards, well above the NFL average. So they rank very high in percentage of times they face third or fourth down and 7+ yards, which is bad because you're going to face a blitz. You're probably going to get man coverage. You're not going to have as much time to get the ball out. It's a low percentage play for the offense to keep a drive alive in those scenarios. And just real quick, so here are your bottom teams that are in the playoffs. You've got Miami. That happens to them 11% of the time. That is the 6th worst in the NFL. If you look at the Vikings, they're the 12th worst at 10.2%. You've got the Chargers, the 13th worst at 10.1%. And then I missed Seattle out of order, but they are the 11th worst at 10.4%. So those are the only 4 teams that are in the playoff that have that issue, right? And it becomes a bigger issue when you're playing against teams that are going to force you to be behind more. When you start playing against better defenses, it's one of those things that can be compounding, right? It can take one bad thing and it really turns it into like 3 bad things, because all of a sudden it goes from being, oh wow, man, that was a 3 and out, to, oh crap, that was a pick 6, or wow, that was a sack fumble. We just gave them the ball on our own 30. Those sort of things really are huge swings, all the time. But in the playoffs, like, those can just be death blows to your team. So I thought that was interesting that a lot of the teams we do have ranked really low, that was one stat that stuck out to me a lot about those teams.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a big difference, right, between facing a 3rd and long in week 7, say against the Lions, versus having to do it against that 49er defense, and
Yeah.
you know that Nick Bosa's coming after you on 3rd and long. So it's definitely something I think to take into account when you're looking to put together a best ball team, or seeing how deep a team could go into the postseason. But yeah, go check it out, and give us your thoughts on the interwebs wherever you can find one of us, and let us know what you think. We're going to let you know what we think about some utilization from the past week or so, and what this could mean heading into the first round of the playoffs. Of course, you can find the utilization report at fantasylife.com. Starting at running back, and there are a handful of running backs I think worth talking about this week. Kenneth Walker III, who's been pretty amazing all season long, especially once he stepped in for the injured Rashad Penny. You've got him upgraded, excuse me, not really a surprise. And I guess the biggest news is he's kind of become a 3-down back now. I mean, before they were sort of splitting time. We even see maybe DJ Dallas or somebody jump in there. But for the most part, this looks like it's Kenneth Walker's job in Seattle, which for our purposes is great news, just to know we only have one guy to worry about there.
Yeah, absolutely. And he's played really well on top of that. Like, his efficiency data points that we really hone in on, like, just to try to get a better understanding of what's the player's talent beyond just what the offensive line does. Like, he's doing really well across the board in all of those things. And you mentioned it, over these last few games, we've really seen his role in the 2-minute offense come back in vogue. We saw it for a brief period in the middle of the year, and it kind of waned a little bit. So they could always go back the other way. But like, all we can do here with utilization is we share the latest trends, right? And the latest trends suggest that he's getting at least half of the 2-minute offensive work. And we've got Travis Homer now on IR. So DJ Dallas is still taking the blitz downs, which are what we were just talking about, 3rd and 4th down, 7+ yards. That's when you want your better blocker in. That's when you want the person that knows the blitz pickups. But guess what? You're typically not checking it down. So it's not as valuable of a snap, right? In formats where you care about catching the ball, because typically, even if the running back manages to go out for a pass, the quarterback's usually going to look past the sticks, right? Now, there are exceptions. We know who the check down Charlies are. And if you happen to have one of those quarterbacks, and Geno Smith is not one of those, then that down can become more valuable, right? So the 2-minute offense, though, is the most important, because that is when the offense is just saying, we've got to go to hurry up. We're at the end of a half, something like that, or they're just going to go up tempo. They want to try to move the ball down a lot of times just to get in field goal. And what's the defense saying? The defense is just saying, we're not giving up a touchdown. And so they play this deep shell coverage that invites all the passes underneath. That's how Austin Eckler goes from a 12-point game heading into a fourth quarter to a 25-point game. That's how that happens. He plays the 2-minute offense. So with Walker getting that, it's really great. But the other thing, just even if he doesn't have all that, it's just crazy the percentage of the rushing attempts that he's getting. So over the last 3 games, he's eclipsed 90. Over the last 4 games, he's eclipsed 90% of the rushing attempts in 3 of 4 contests. So over the last 3 games, Marcus, 26, 23, and 29 rushing attempts. Wow. So yeah, wow. That's a lot. Now it's a tough out this weekend. You got to go play the 49ers. They're probably not going to advance. But if they did, and you're building a contrarian lineup, and a lot of people don't have Walker, hearing the utilization we just talked about, he's probably a part of it, right? Mm-hmm. If they manage to break through. Easier said than done. 49ers do have the best run defense on the planet. I kind of like him less so in these playoff contests, unless you're going contrarian, which is fine. But I do like him this weekend, potentially in DFS, where I can limit my contrarian play just to 1 week, right? Instead of having to deal with it, for the rest of the way. So Walker, yeah. And just from a dynasty perspective, from a thinking of 2023, wow, it just looks really, really good for Kenneth Walker and what the future looks like.
Yep. For what it's worth, Pete Carroll earlier said that one of the things they want to do is, surprise you. They want to go out and run. They want to establish the run. They want to run the football. They want to try to stop the run. Pete's done a lot of changing, a lot of growth, but at some point you are who you are, and he still wants to run the football. And it's good for us that, there's pretty much one guy who's getting all that work there. And I'm very curious to see what the value on Kenneth Walker is going to be in dynasty leagues, because what he did this back half of the season was pretty incredible. And I think the hope is maybe he is just the guy going forward. So I think he's going to be a very interesting name for the offseason. Jeff Wilson Jr. left San Francisco, seemed to have found a nice home there in Miami. Now, Raheem Mostert has a thumb issue, and I would be kind of surprised to see him. Mike McDaniel, so far, has been pretty, 1 back, 2 backs. He hasn't been too tricky with what he's doing in this backfield, but can we lean on Jeff Wilson Jr., especially, let's throw in the caveat that it might be Skylar Thompson. Does this mean good things for Jeff Wilson potentially?
Well, I think it means good things from a utilization perspective. It's a little more scary when you look at the prospects of needing to win the game, and keep things alive if you're thinking about playoff best ball with Jeff Wilson, because you've got to play the Buffalo Bills. So it's not an easy draw. Now, the Bills have been a little bit overrated, really, as far as their run defense goes, and we have seen the 49ers, the Dolphins, lean more into the run game whenever they have not had Tua under center. So it could potentially mean more touches for Mostert. Not for Mostert, sorry, for Jeff Wilson. Mm-hmm. But what we've seen with Wilson, despite the fact that last weekend it helped that Mostert, he broke his thumb. So we'll see what happens with this weekend, to your point. But really, Wilson had been trending up for the last 3 weeks. His snaps have been 60%, 65%, 65%. The last 2 games, 63% and 52% of the rushing attempts. And the big part, he's getting all the passing down work now for about a month. So he gets almost all the 2-minute offense work, most of the long down and distance, and his route participation has been over 60% all of the last 3 weeks because of that. So you're probably going to have a trailing script. You're going to have a defense that plays a lot of zone. You're going to probably have Raheem Mostert at a minimum in a reduced role, even further than what we were used to. So I think there's a shot this weekend, for Wilson. Maybe the Dolphins don't win, but he could see 20-plus touches. And so anytime you're going to get 20-plus touches from a running back, it's someone that you've got to consider, especially as far as DFS goes.
I think that's going to be the thing, just the opportunity there. The script does concern me a little bit, just because you expect that they may be playing from behind this week, but that should mean plenty of touches if there's no Raheem Mostert, or as you mentioned, a diminished Raheem Mostert this week. Then that means some pretty good things potentially for Jeff Wilson. We'll see. Mike McDaniel has been able to do some really good things with his run game. We saw it in San Francisco, and we've seen it at times in Miami as well. So there's a lot of chances for Wilson to touch the football this week. Joe Mixon, maybe not touching the football as much as we would like. Samaje Perine just still hanging around there in Cincinnati. And before, Dwayne, I know in past years they were sort of using him. He's talking about guys getting that 2-minute offense work. That had been Samaje Perine. His role isn't huge, but it does seem to have expanded a little bit beyond just being the 3rd down 2-minute guy now in Cincinnati.
For sure. And early in the season, the thing we didn't necessarily see happening for Mixon was he had the 2-minute offense. It wasn't P. Ryan. P. Ryan was just getting the long down and distance stuff. Then he has the concussion in week 11, doesn't come back until week 14. And really his role had changed so much. In the rushing department before the injury, he was averaging a 73% of the rushing attempts per week. And then that has now fallen to 57% since he's been back. And it's because, to your point, P. Ryan is now carrying more of the load. He's getting about a third, right, of the carries on the ground, and he's regained the 2-minute offense. That now is all going to P. Ryan. So, and it's hard, honestly, to argue against it because P. Ryan played so well, you know. So with Mixon, if you're playing, in these playoff contests, he's still a guy you're going to draft. Why? Because the Bengals are one of the teams that could play 4 games. You could get 4 games out of them and they get to the Super Bowl, right? The Chiefs can only play 3 because they've got a bye week. The Eagles can only play 3 because they got a bye week. So you look at a team like the Bengals, you get an extra week out of them. And if they're hot and they make it back to the Super Bowl, Joe Mixon's obviously going to score some touchdowns. So I'm trying not to overstate it, but it's just something to think about, like in the grand scheme. Don't overvalue him like too much, right? Or maybe if you've got a tiebreaker kind of decision and the way you're leaning. And also for DFS, I think this plays in a little bit more, on a week-to-week basis. Mixon's still someone I like for the playoffs, but just keep in mind, like the role is, we've had 4 weeks now of this, so it's a trend at this point. As P. Ryan's got this role.
Right. Yeah, it's been about 40% to 45% of the snaps for P. Ryan in each of the last 4 full games for the Bengals. So he's hanging around there. He's making plays. The Bengals don't seem likely to change anything because why would they when they are winning football games? So we know that Joe Mixon doesn't seem to be an every down back. I think we had sort of hoped that maybe Travis Etienne was turning into that every down back, but you seem skeptical that's happening for him right now in Jacksonville.
Yeah, so whenever I do the utilization report, there's really 3 categories, right? There's upgrade, there's downgrade, and then there's really a monitoring section where we don't have enough to say this is a trend yet, but it's kind of just like eyebrow raised, because sometimes we only have so much time to react, right? And you're trying to make decisions with what information we have. So I'll still note things where maybe we have it's not a trend, but we've got 1 week or 2 weeks of data. And so that's really where, ETN fits in this equation. And at first, like if you just look at it and it was like, oh, week 17, he wasn't really out there that much. Well, it was a blowout. He didn't have to play in the second half. Not a big deal. They were destroying the Texans. Okay, whatever. Going to week 18, though, it's a must-win game. You're playing against the Titans. You're trying to get into the playoffs. And he had a 56% snap share. That is his lowest, if we exclude the blowout win against the Texans, if we exclude week 12, I believe, when he got hurt, knocked out of the game early with the foot injury. Outside of those, that's his lowest snap share, 56%, since the James Robinson trade. And so there's just a little bit of a concern here. We saw JaMychal Hasty in a game that really mattered take 48% of the snaps last week. And I'll be honest, watching Etienne lately doesn't look very good. Like when I'm watching him, doesn't seem to really be playing very decisive kind of football. And again, this is not me studying his film for hours and hours and hours. Like right. I look at the data and then I go watch the film and you see what lines up, what doesn't. And you start thinking, well, why would he, and sometimes we can jump to conclusions, but you're thinking why would this suddenly change now? And so we've seen him lose some of the long down and distance work over the last several weeks, but it wasn't too big of a deal because he's still getting 72% of the rushing attempts. Well, this last week, we saw the rushing attempts also fall. That was at 50%. Again, another low dating back to when the James Robinson trade happened. So just a little bit of I don't like this. I don't like this. They've shown us they're willing to, use him in a 2-way committee early in the year. And now we're kind of late in the year and they may be showing that hand again. He hasn't necessarily been performing as well as he was at one point in the season. So those are problems. The Jaguars are still a 60% advance rate, to the they've got a 60% chance to advance to the divisional round based on 538, 12% to the conference championships. So they're one of those teams, you're still going to like drafting them, for, your playoff best ball teams. But I'm probably leaning to the wide receivers and to Trevor Lawrence more so than Travis Etienne if I'm trying to decide what way I'm stacking the teams.
And that's where we've seen the Jaguars really take off offensively over the last month plus is in that passing game with Trevor Lawrence hitting, take your pick between Kirk and Jones and Ingram, even Marvin Jones getting a game in there somewhere as well. What I think is interesting about Etienne too is that he was a guy that I really thought was going to be a big riser up fantasy draft boards come next season, because we had sort of hoped once they moved James Robinson that Etienne was going to be the guy. And, I wonder how many people are going to notice this, take this into account when we get to draft season, that maybe it is not fully the Travis Etienne show back there. Maybe it turns into a bit of a committee. So a guy that I thought might be able to sneak into the first round of drafts, maybe he doesn't. But I guess we won't fully know the answer to that probably until we get to next August, or unless we see something in free agency or the draft. That's a question we're not really going to know the answer to fully, is it?
Yeah, it's going to be tough. We'll get one more data point at least, right, this weekend for the Jaguars. If they win, we'll get another 2, and that will be important. But then, everything, all bets are off once the offseason starts. Like, who do they sign? Do they draft another back? What do they do with the rest of the roster? I'm going to have some concerns, like if they add legitimate competition, just because I feel that Etienne hasn't been as advertised, especially Marcus, in the passing game. Like, I think if you would have asked, I don't know about you, but like if you would have asked me in the preseason, what's the path for Etienne to blowing up past his ADP, I would have said he is an explosive playmaker who should be very involved in the passing game. He's not involved in the passing game. They are not concerned with dialing things up for him underneath. Now, whether that's because they've got multiple other weapons they can throw to down the field with Zay Jones and Christian Kirk and Evan Ingram, a lot of those guys have overperformed expectations, or is it just because really Etienne's not the plus we thought he was in the passing game? And so that's my biggest concern for him, is that, like, do we really love him as an early down banger? That doesn't feel like that's going to be the best way to get the most out of Travis Etienne, and it's kind of what he's been sandwiched, or pegged into this year, at least with the Jaguars.
Yeah, and that's the thing. When they drafted him, my hope had been that first year that the Jaguars were going to sort of do what the Browns had done so successfully with Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt, and sort of use the combination of Robinson and Etienne that way. We didn't get to see it that first year because Etienne gets hurt, misses the entire season. Then you have Robinson get hurt at the end of that year, and he wasn't around very long. He had the quick start to the year, then they traded him. So we never really fully got to see what it would be like with the two of those guys together. I'm with you. I thought Etienne was going to be more of a pass catching guy. We saw it a little bit at Clemson, and it just has not translated to the NFL. The other caveat I would throw in is this offense could have Calvin Ridley back next year, or have him next year. He should be back potentially in the league next year. So that's just one more guy to throw the football to, which means one more opportunity for Travis Etienne to not get targets next year.
Yeah,
so.
Calvin Ridley taking over for Marvin Jones, like, that's going to be problematic for everyone. That's good for Trevor Lawrence, but Calvin Ridley will be the best receiver on the team. Like, if he can get back to form, right? He was doing some really good things, before the injuries and then the suspension, with the gambling stuff. So it's but Ridley, like, he's a legit receiver. So I think it'll be very interesting. It's great for Trevor Lawrence, though, man. Like, Trevor Lawrence, that's going to be a guy we're going to be excited about next year.
Absolutely, 100%. Over to the Chiefs. So Ronald Jones, on Sunday, I wasn't quite as locked in as I had been previous Sundays. I'm sort of, checking on games or whatever, and I see Ronald Jones has a touchdown. I was like, wow, Ronald Jones has a touchdown. I'm going to chalk this up to Andy Reid just trying to get guys some playing time at the end of the season. I don't want to read too much into this, but, as you mentioned here in our show notes, Clyde Edwards-Helaire could be back soon. Are we going to be back to having the Chiefs backfield as another potential headache for us?
Yeah, again, this is one of those that falls into the monitoring section. We only have one data point, but you've got one eyebrow raised, or you've kind of got like this skeptical look. You're like, like, what's happening here? And we've seen Andy Reid do this so many times. So that's what like kind of gives you like flashbacks, right? You're like, oh God, like this could be bad. Like, we've seen him do it so many times, at least with the Chiefs, where he'll rotate multiple backs. And it wasn't just a late in the game, let's rest our starters thing. In the first in the first quarter of the game, he split his workload with Isaiah Pacheco. And we saw Jerick McKinnon have a season low, or not season low, since like week 8%, right, of the rushing attempts. So sorry, that was his lowest since week 12. So I agree with you. It could just be, hey, we're going to get our guys a little bit of rest. But at the same time, like, there's just always that chance, because we've seen it be this three-way committee. So just want to bring it up to people. Just be aware of it. Like, so I would be careful about getting like way overweighted, right, on Jerick McKinnon and some of these other guys. You're still going to want access to them, right, if you're playing best ball for the playoffs. But just something to, you know, kind of note and put it in your back pocket and use it for what you think it's worth.
Yeah. By the way, you mentioned Jerick McKinnon. He has one of the more hilarious receiving lines recently. 3 targets, 2 catches, 0 yards, and a touchdown.
He has some pretty hilarious lines, period. Like, I mean, yeah, it's almost as funny as like, you know, I feel like he's got like a 2 for 102 somewhere. You know?
He might actually. He really might at some point. But yeah, I saw the 2 for 0 and a touch. I'm like, that's pretty funny. For people who are anti PPR, that is going to be one that they can stomp their feet over.
The Chiefs are amazing with how they basically take utilization and they just give it double birds. Like they're the one team that double birds to utilization. Doesn't matter if a guy plays 30% of the time, he can score 2 touchdowns. Kadarius Toney, like, it can't even with Sky Moore out, like they really don't have a wide receiver 2 per se. Like it's just really Juju and Kelsey and McKinnon. So you would think, oh wow, like Kadarius Toney probably could get 60-70% route participation. Then you see the last 2 games, like wow, 2 top 24 finishes. His role must really be growing. No, it's not. His role's not growing. It's just the freaking Chiefs and the things they do in the red zone, right? And what they do inside the 10-yard line. And you're probably going to get Mecole Hardman back. So at some point you start to think like, how can all this keep up? How can Jerick McKinnon keep scoring all these touchdowns inside the 10? Mecole Hardman was doing the same thing. Kadarius Toney is doing that. And you still got to get Travis Kelce involved. And Juju's kind of been quiet. Like, so best ball, you're fine though with the Chiefs, because like if you just stack up the team, you don't really care which one it is. You're just trying to get as many of them, and you want them with Mahomes so that, you know, it doesn't matter which one it is, you're getting it. You know, you want as many pieces as you can. So it is like if you're trying it for DFS or just trying to nail something for 1 week, like you know, there's always a chance the rug gets pulled out from under you. But you also know that, like, you know, if it hits, like it could be huge. I mean, Jerick McKinnon had 32.2 points in week 15. I mean, come on. Like he finished as the RB1 2 weeks in a row.
Yeah. The other big question is, will the Chiefs have another childhood schoolyard game that they can use for their huddle? They went ring around the rosy last week. Maybe they go duck, duck, goose. I don't know. We'll see what Andy Reid has up his sleeve for the postseason. James Cook got a lot of work in week 18. And, you know, it feels like every year, maybe late in the season, the Bills decide they want to do something to kind of move on from Devin Singletary. Then we get to week 1 next year and Devin Singletary is still involved. But is James Cook finally the guy to kind of push Devin Singletary off the ledge and take over as that RB1 in Buffalo?
Yeah, it's another one of these, you know, one data point kind of things. This is the first week of the entire season where we have seen James Cook actually lead in snaps and in rushing attempts. He had 56% of the snaps. He had 41% of the rushing attempts, which was number 1 out of all the running backs on the week. Now, Singletary still did keep the long down and distance work. He kept, or 50% of that, and he kept 50% of the 2-minute offense, which still led, right, in both of those categories. So it's a rotation still. And I remember a few weeks back, we kind of had a similar data point, and we got, you know, it's kind of like, okay, like, is now the time? Are we jumping in on James Cook? And it kind of went back the other way. So it's another one of these where we don't know for sure what they're going to do, but I will take it. It's a positive, right? It's better than saying, oh, he had 30% of the snaps again. At least it's one of those things where you're like, okay, like this is the first time he's done this year. Is there a chance that they expand his role? I think no matter what, though, Marcus, we're probably dealing with a committee in the playoffs. It's just a matter of, can Cook be the lead, you know, of the committee? If I'm picking between the two, though, like if I'm deciding, like I only want one of these 2 Bills backs, you know, for whatever reason, my build, if I can take Cook, I'm probably going to do it, just because in this data point's just enough to tip me that way to be like, you know, if I think one of them has a chance to take over and really grow their role, like who am I picking? It's probably James Cook. And what's funny is maybe it should be Nyheim Hines, the guy that just returns 2 freaking kicks for a touchdown, because he's really good. He's really good at football, and he's getting limited. He hardly gets to get on the field at all. I actually kind of wonder, like, is he really just their best running back?
He might be. I mean, all those years in Indianapolis where it just seems like at least once or twice a year there'd be the Nyheim Hines game where he catches a bunch of passes, he gets you like over 100 yards, gets in the end zone. It always seems that he's stuck somewhere in an offense behind a couple other guys, and that's definitely the case in Buffalo. Last running back, J.K. Dobbins, didn't play week 18, but really was good down the stretch. And I wonder, I know the Ravens want to run. I know they seem committed to having multiple backs, but maybe at some point they just turn things over to J.K. Dobbins because he was really good on fairly limited opportunities in the last month.
Yeah, and the big thing with Dobbins is we've got the concussion to Gus Edwards, and they rested J.K. Dobbins last week in preparation for this first playoff game. So he's got the rest. We potentially won't have Gus Edwards in the lineup this weekend. And you've already seen J.K. Dobbins, really come through. I won't say it's like a great, stat line, but it's a good stat line. Like when you look at what he's been able to do from a rushing attempt standpoint, he's averaged over 14 carries over the last 3 games that he's been out there. So you could see that number look more like 17, 18. Now they've got to go play the Bengals. The Bengals are favorites in the game. There's probably going to be a trailing game script, but the Ravens, I will say, they're one of those teams that will stick with the run no matter what. And if we could get Lamar back, even though that would steal some of the carries away, it would be a positive though, because what Lamar does when he's on the field, when teams have to account for him, it just opens up more lanes for the running back because they have to stay true to their, defensive, lanes, to their assignments. And they want to make sure that Lamar doesn't bust off an 80-yarder. And so a lot of times what that means is whoever the running back is that's in, for the Ravens, it just means they're going to have a really large lane to run through. So I do think there are some positives here for J.K. Dobbins. If you're thinking about, again, the DFS, I like him more there than I do in playoff formats. I would like him a little more, though, kind of back to our talk around the power ranks. If we knew that Lamar was going to be in there, I think that gives them a chance to pull off an upset. And then suddenly he kind of has a little bit of a different appeal if you're thinking about these, best ball formats for playoffs.
Yeah, I like J.K. Dobbins. I'd like to see him expand that role a little bit. But one thing we know, he's going to get those opportunities. They're going to run the football. A couple of pass catchers we're talking about. Keenan Allen. And when I saw this in the notes, I had to go double check it because it sort of blew my mind. The wide receiver 2.
Me too.
The wide receiver 2 since week 11. Like, I knew he had been good. I know he'd been putting up some numbers. I don't think I'd realized he had been that good since week 11. That's a wow. I guess it goes back to, Brandon Staley playing his starters for most of the game in week 18. I mean, it's a good thing that Keenan Allen didn't get hurt, but that's amazing.
It's a factor, but it was also against the Broncos, one of the best secondaries in the league. Mm-hmm. The Broncos are truly one of the top 3 to 4 that you kind of don't want to mess with. Now, if you're going to get to them, you're going to do it from the slot. You're going to do it underneath because they play a lot of zone. And so that's where Keenan, really, that's where he makes his hay. So it makes sense, on one hand, but it's still a really good defense, against the pass. Mm-hmm. So to see him drop, a 30 burger is really nice. And again, like you said, he's the wide receiver 2 since week 11 when he came back. He ranks 12th in PFF receiving grade, 84.8 on the season, 16th in targets per route run at 24%. And he's 14th in yards per route run at 2.14 for the season. So the 10th year veteran, not done. I know some people were kind of thinking, and I even kind of put him on the list of, the cliff can come fast. We don't always see it coming. And once you get to this age, like, it can just happen. We don't always get a precursor to it. He says, not this year. Not this year. He battled through the injury. That was obviously a factor. But now that he's back, Keenan Allen is, so for these playoffs, you got to look at him because we have a smaller field, right? We only have 14 teams. Like, you're playing in DFS this weekend. Like, his profile right now, in a full slate, would say that he's a low-end wide receiver 1, but we only have 14 teams, so he's at a minimum, he's a mid-range wide receiver 1. You might just have to call him a high-end wide receiver 1 this weekend against the Jaguars.
Yeah, he just consistent. I put him on the list of wide receivers that we probably take for granted. Him, Mike Evans, just guys who come out and they're steady, and we sort of just expect over a full season, Keenan Allen's going to get you 100 catches, 1,100 yards, 6 to 8 touchdowns. Ho-hum. It's pretty solid. And it's probably, had he played a full season, probably about where he would have finished if he had a full slate of games under his belt. Last one, a tight end here. And Isaiah Likely, we liked him in the preseason. He had a couple of games mid-season where he really flashed. The Ravens don't really have anybody to throw the football to beyond Mark Andrews. And when I think about this, we haven't seen a team run a really great 2 tight end set since, the Hunter Henry, Aaron Hernandez days. I know teams have tried to recreate it, and nobody has really done it. Could the Ravens maybe do that with Likely and Andrews, considering they don't have any wide receivers that scare you in that offense?
Yeah, I think their challenge is that it's really 2 receiving tight ends. Typically, if you have that, one of them is more capable of staying in line and really being, more of a blocker. But that doesn't mean that it can't happen. Like, teams evolve. I think the biggest part is what you pointed out is they don't really have anyone right now behind Mark Andrews. Like Demarcus Robinson was, kind of a journeyman veteran, played some time with the Chiefs, would have a good game here or there. He's had a couple of nice games even with the Ravens, but he's not a guy that can come out and really demand these high, these high target shares and things like that. Whereas with Likely, over the last 3 games, 25%, 36%, and 29% targets per route run. Now we know we didn't have Mark Andrews in week 18, so he really became like the centerpiece to the offense. But his route participation, even before last weekend when he had the 86% with Andrews out, like it's been not, these are not good numbers, but when you're getting the targets per route run like he is, like it's decent. He has been at 44%, then he jumped to 59%. Like we really want our tight ends to be 80% plus in route participation. But having said all that, like if the Ravens, you have to do some projecting here, but it would make sense, Marcus, for the Ravens to just finally say, screw it, what do we got to do to get him on the field all the time with Mark Andrews? Like, especially if you get behind and it's like, okay, they know we're passing. We need to throw even though they like to say run heavy, maybe that's the answer. Just, okay, well, fine. Maybe you don't need to be as run heavy if that means that you can't have Likely on the field with Mark Andrews. So I think that's kind of what you got to think through is like, and we've got to make some leaps here. Will they finally just make this change? It makes sense to us because they really don't have anyone else that can make the impact that Likely does. But he could be interesting. Like if you did build a Lamar team, for, your best ball playoffs, like an interesting stack that's probably not going to be out there a lot, like it, or at least making sure at the end of it, like if you can add Likely to, he doesn't have at least I haven't looked at the ADP like in the last couple of days, but like Likely's not going to have a huge ADP. And like, so he's a guy that when you do draft Lamar, like just tack him on like to the end, like, and that gives you if you're going with Lamar, you're going contrarian anyway, because you're assuming he's not hurt. A lot of people are just going to avoid him because they worry that he's not going to play. So that's the thing. And actually Jordan's chiming in that Likely's going undrafted.
There it is.
So like, if you did hit on that, like if Lamar somehow went to the Super Bowl and Likely took over a big role, like you're talking about immediately flipping, so much leverage to your team because no one else, people didn't want Lamar, number one, and number two, they weren't drafting Likely. And so when you think about those kind of things, like from a larger strategic level, it can make, even though this doesn't like we're taking a risk here, it can make it's kind of risk that can be worth it because it is such leverage against the field.
Well, and that is how you win. That Adam Sandler meme. This is how I win. It's by taking those risks that nobody else is even thinking about, and hopefully they come and hit for you. Definitely would be a little bit of a surprise, especially with no Lamar Jackson, to see them get past Cincinnati. But if it happens, you can be at the front of that train, 100% there. Before we go. The regular season is over, which means we've had some head coaches who have been let go from their respective jobs. Arizona parted ways with Cliff Kingsbury, and I saw plenty of photos of him in his living room in that beautiful villa, I guess, there in the desert. As he was hanging out watching the draft, that resurfaced again. We talked about Lovie Smith and how he sort of set fire to the Texans' #1 draft pick on his way out the door. Jeff Saturday has not officially been let go. He's going to interview for that job. We'll see if he gets it or if he goes somewhere else. Sean McVay, I mentioned, sort of in a holding pattern, trying to figure out if he wants to come back next year or if he's going to step away for who knows how long, but that's very much up in the air in Los Angeles. The Broncos previously fired Nathaniel Hackett. He was let go during the course of the season. So that job is open, and they are in the process of interviewing candidates. As you look at those 5 jobs right now, is there one that stands out to you as being like the really plum, like this is the one, maybe it's the Rams, maybe it's not, I don't know, but is there one that really jumps out at you as like, this is the place that I would love to go if I had the opportunity?
I think it's the Cardinals. I mean, you've got DeAndre Hopkins, you've got Marquise Brown, you've got Zach Ertz, you've got Trey McBride, you've got Rondell Moore, like you've got James Conner. I mean, you've got Kyler
Mhm.
I feel like, a really good offensive coach could come in there and maybe do some things we've never seen for Kyler, before, because Cliff didn't really do him many favors. So, and if you're looking at an offense that has all those weapons and maybe you want to spend draft picks on defense, things like that, like a really good offensive coach, like could really maybe set that off, so that's the one that I would look at. The thing with McVay, like, I get it. You hate to see it because like the Rams basically, you traded everything away to try to win these Super Bowls,
Mhm.
and you kind of feel like you're just leaving the fans holding the bag. Now, look, I'm not blaming him, but I mean, like, he's got a contract,
Mhm.
So I mean, there is part of me that's like, dude, like, honor this, like, and if you're really worth it, like, come out here and coach this team up. You're gonna get
Right.
Stafford back next year. You're gonna get Cooper Cup back. Like, there's a lot of bad things about where the Rams are gonna be from a roster
Yeah.
construction standpoint. But like McVay is a good offensive coach. So, and again, like that's his thing. That's not really for me to say. And I get it. Like, maybe he's burnt out, maybe he's stressed out, maybe there's personal things. Who knows what's going on in someone's life? So, like, he needs to do what's best for him, what's best for his
Right.
family. It just kind of hit me weird. I was like, like, just because of how much they've traded away to have a team that could win a Super Bowl, and now it's like, oh, had one bad season after that. See you later, guys.
Right.
I don't know. That's kind of weird.
Yeah, I think what sits sort of weird for me isn't so much that maybe he's burned out and wants to walk away, but it's the talk that he may go away and then potentially come back.
He will. He's
Jordan
too
Rodriguez
young.
wrote a great story in the Athletic about it, and the option of him coming back to coach the Rams, basically that not wanting to go through the pain of a rebuild, right? And look, nobody wants to experience that. Like, it's not going to be fun, especially when you don't have draft picks. But the fact that he is has the option potentially to walk away from it and then come back in a few years once the table is set again, that does sit a little bit weird to me. If you're gonna walk away and say, you know what, I'm done, I'm washing my hands of this, I'm gonna go do TV for a handful of years and then we'll sort of reevaluate. That I can sort of live with, but if the idea is to sit out, watch whoever is in the front office for the Rams try to rebuild this thing and then jump back in when
And
when
what
everything's made, that's weird to me.
what coach wants to take that job? A terrible roster with, McVay hanging over your shoulder as soon as it gets good again?
Yeah.
Like, you can't recruit a good coach that way. Like,
No.
you can't bring someone in. So I think the best case for the Rams, what happens is if McVay goes away, they tank for 2 years, they rebuild, they actually get some draft capital back, they get another coach. And I haven't looked at his contract. Maybe Jordan mentioned this in her column. She's really good. But would that potentially give them something if someone really wanted McVay, like what we're having with Sean Payton go on right now? You get a draft pick, and
Yeah.
you've got the rights to him because someone
Yeah.
would probably pony up to come get him. You
Right.
might get a first round pick out of it. So, like, I
Yeah.
think that's the best case. And then you just move on. Even if that means you're on your second coach by then, that's what I would be trying to do. Is like, man, like, you go ahead, go do your thing. We'll take the pick, especially
Right.
if you've got another coach that you've brought in that you actually have confidence in. Maybe if that's not the case, then you could go back to McVay. But I agree, it's kind of weird.
Yeah. The other job I would say that has some interest would be the Broncos, with the
Yeah.
caveat that Russ is fixable. That what we saw from Russell Wilson this year can be fixed, and maybe it can, because at the end of the year, after they let Hackett go, Russ got better, the offense got better. So maybe it was just a situation where coach and player weren't necessarily vibing. But you've got a good defense, you've got some youth on that side of the ball. In theory, you've got some good playmakers. So if you can get your quarterback right again, maybe it's not all bad in Denver. You just have the specter of the Chiefs, who have just been hammering everybody for
Yeah.
years. But I think there's room to maybe build something in Denver if Russ isn't actually cooked, and I don't think we completely know the answer to that now.
Yeah, and with the Broncos, I think this is really your only choice. You've got to get a really good coach.
Yeah.
The problem with going after Sean Payton is you got to give up another first round pick on everything else that you've already sunk into Russ. Like,
Mhm.
oh man, that's a lot. That is
Yeah.
a lot. So I don't know. Like I would love to see Sean Payton there. and give them a chance, because it would, it would give us enough hope to be like, okay, we can at least think about drafting Broncos.
Right.
Now Jerry Judy's been great down the stretch. Jerry Judy's finally been healthy, and the dude's balling. So like, I think he's looking like the first round draft pick that we just haven't got to see. But I feel like the Broncos, they've got to make a big coaching move. I think it just comes down to, they really want to give that draft capital, or can they? Here's my thing, Marcus. NFL teams, they suck at finding these coaches. They just retread the same people over and over, and it's all about, oh, you got to coach Patrick Mahomes, and he was awesome. There's got to be a better process. It can't just be who had the best quarterback last year. Like, you should be looking for different things. What coaches came in college, NFL, whatever level, and they elevated all the things they had. Kind of what we saw this year with Daboll. Like, what coaches, and it doesn't even have to be to that extreme, but that's what I would be looking for. What play callers are being innovative? What play callers are getting the most out of what they have in front of them, even if they are on a losing team? Like, I would much rather go about it that way than the way that the NFL, it's amazing to me that they do not have a better way to really find coaching candidates. And the other thing that would do, it would open things up for minorities. It would open things up broader, more to everyone, because right now we're stuck in this good old boy world.
It's the same names, and we're going to see the same names, I think, come through the hiring cycles again this year, and it's going to be, I think, frustrating for a lot.
There are smarter people that can be doing this. Just like, I'm not trying to get into politics, but you look at it and you're like, okay, there's at some point with some of these people, I'm like, I know there's smarter people. They just must not want the job. Like, I don't know what's going on, but like, that's what's happening right now with this coaching stuff. And it kind of drives you crazy, because there are these innovative, and it doesn't even have to be young minds, but I'm okay to young minds as well. Like, and stirring the pot and mixing things up. Like, I think they got NFL GMs, managers, owners, they've got to figure out a better way to calibrate around coaching.
Yeah, and I think just my last point on this is some of these coaches need to believe they're going to have stability, and I say that looking dead at the Texans here on this list, where you've had one and done coaches in back-to-back years, and everybody seems to be believing that really Houston's just waiting for Josh McCown, to have him come in and step in and take that job, which means that, I think for the Texans, it either is Josh McCown or it's nobody, because I don't think anyone's going to have the faith that they'll get a real fair shot to do that job there in Houston.
Hey, let me ask you one last one. What if the Chargers are one and done? Right? Do we really want to keep Brandon Staley around another year? He was considered so sharp just 2 years ago, a year ago. Is he really sharp at this point? Like, I don't understand his decision making. I don't understand. We led the show off talking about what he did with his players. Playing them in a game that didn't matter at all, playing them too late into the game, and then you get into all the in-game decision making, and he's like constantly in the middle of, is he making these right decisions or not? I don't know, man. I just don't know what I really think about Staley at this point.
I think there's a point to which I think he's lost some confidence, right? Because he came in and he did sort of have, I won't say boy genius, but there was definitely that idea of like, he's this fresh young face. He's going to really innovate. He's going to do a lot of things. And I think the in-game decisions, whether it's, fourth downs, going for two, the challenges, because some of those have backfired and the criticism that has come with it, I think he's sort of lost his nerve in a lot of ways. And I think it's really sort of hurt him. But on top of it, you got to figure out, how much longer can you roll with him, knowing that you've only got Justin Herbert on his rookie deal for pretty much one, maybe 2 more years. I would assume they're going to pick up that 5th-year option for Justin Herbert.
Well, they will. But the thing is, like, does Herbert decide eventually here to hold out and force their hand, too? So, yeah.
Yeah. So I think there are real questions if the Chargers don't win this week, which, look, it is not a given that they will win. I think there are real questions about what happens with Brandon Staley in the future as well. So I don't know. I'm sure there'll be plenty of that to talk about as we get through the entire off season. In the meantime, go and check us out over at fantasylife.com if you haven't already. Plenty of stuff to get there. We got the team rankings, the power rankings there. You can check out the utilization report. There will be more information coming up, of course, as we get further into the week, which means we'll also have another show for you as we get later on in the week. So be sure to go and check that out. For Dwayne, I am Marcus. This has been the Fantasy Life Podcast. Enjoy your week. We'll talk to you again real soon.